station. We'll have turn David loose to talk about, we have a few questions, just ideas about the space so you can learn about the design behind it. Can you hear me? Okay. Can you hear me now? Sorry, not used to speaking with these yet. This is my first time using the microphones in the theater as well. Thank you all for being here and helping us stress test the theater. You're our guinea pigs here. So, David has been a wonder to work with through the process. I've been very fortunate that I've worked with the library since 2015. I'm gonna kiss the mic, I think. That's right. Where's my guy with the mixing board? So I've worked with the library since 2015, before we started this whole process. So I was lucky to work with Russell Prater and David Adjaye and their amazing design team, as well as the folks at Hunt & Brady throughout the process. And I just have to say, it's so wonderful to be listened to. So, you hear a lot about projects with architects and they have a vision and it supersedes your own. And that was not the case at all here. They have worked on so many wonderful public spaces that we felt very safe turning our precious project over to them. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your history with public libraries. So we're not you first. You have some, starting in the UK, some wonderful libraries, and you've been challenging communities to think differently about their libraries. So can you sort of tell us more about the Idea Stores in the UK, a very special library rebranding, and your journey with spaces of lifelong learning?
Thank you, Sabrina. It's really amazing to be here now and to be in this iteration of the future of the library in the 21st century, and I think this is what this is about. I think we have an image of libraries in our minds as going back to sort of medieval castles, but those are private libraries. Those are and even libraries of monasteries, which was the history of libraries. These were sort of very special elite spaces. And even in the beginning of the 20th century, 19th century, 20th century, the beginning of sort of big universities, those were still about certain people that got access to that information. And post-war, there was a rethinking of what libraries should be, and that's when the library became a very public community infrastructure. It was about helping people to catch up with the complexities of the world, to learn, to have access to information, and it's gone around the world. It started off as just getting a set amount of books in any community and in a box usually, and now we're in extraordinary complex places here. And at the beginning of when I started my career, the first public job I won was the Idea Store, and it was called an Idea Store, but it was essentially a remaking of the library services. Yes, you're right, you do have to kiss the mic. So the Idea Store was really, with an incredible library team then in London at sort of 2001, 2002, 2003, wanted to rethink the library not just as a depository for books, understanding the advent of the internet, but as a kind of space for all community to come together, to learn, to research, to have archives. And at that point, the critical discussion was about bringing this notion of lifelong learning became a buzz. This was like at the beginning of the 21st century, that we're not just learning up to 21 or 24 and then that's it and we kind of become something else, but you lifelong learn because the world is complex and things are changing and technology is changing and the workplace is changing. All these things are different and we really need to retool. So the library started to become something that was more than just a place for books. It became a place for the community. It's a place to gather all generations, the diversity of people in the community together to learn from each other. And it was about creating spaces, classrooms, workshop spaces, and library spaces together in one seamless condition. And it taught me a lot, and it really sort of awakened my appetite for understanding how important this topology is in city making and in our urban environments. Because when we opened the building, the thing that really confirmed it for me was, up to that point, libraries were absolutely not cool. Young kids did not have any.
Our cat eye glasses and fingers.
No, it was just like what. And then we opened this building. We made it out of, it was transparent. It had colored glass. It was wood and recycled materials, and you had access to computers and all these things. And the kids lined up around the block to get into the building. And I remember the sort of then team looking, and we were just like, we can't believe this, And this idea that this would take place, this would be the space that was more important than maybe the mall or, the retail space, not to put down any retail spaces, but like, we want our kids in the libraries.
Out of trouble and in the libraries.
Out of trouble and in the libraries, and having their dates in the libraries. Do all your stuff in the library. Was just so magical. And so the idea store really awoken that, and that's when really the whole thing took off.
Yeah, and we feel like David brought a lot of that to this space. So I know when we talked with you and Russell, our key ask for this building, after being trapped in our old building where walls were very rigid, things were very fixed, very inflexible, didn't have a lot of opportunity to change and adapt and grow to meet the needs of our community, flexibility was at a premium in this space. So can you speak a little bit about how the spaces are designed to turn into other things and walls of open and close and what that means?
So what you'll see here is that there's a lot of an architectural word, as Ray, we were teaching Ray all these architectural words. So porosity, now I'm kissing it too much. Porosity is a great word. It's really a sort of botanical, biological word about things going into each other. And I think that what we've tried to do is to use this word porosity spatially as a way to make new flexibilities. So things open into each other, things are able to connect to each other. You're not just in a room with a closed door. You can see the light. You can see people coming up and down the stairs. We can shield it off if we want to. We can turn this into a very formal setting or into a loose setting. We can take away the chairs and make it just an amphitheater that people can just use as a waiting area or a hangout for a large group. So this idea of fluidity in terms of the use and the ability to kind of reuse space is really, I think, the 21st century flexibility. It's not just about taking down walls and putting up walls, because that's quite labor intensive and very carbon unfriendly. So it's really about designing buildings that really have flexibility built into them that allow a certain fluidity. And that's really at the heart of how we think about spaces, especially when you want to future-proof them as much as possible, because we know what we know now, but in 20 years the world is going to be different. So we're hoping that fluidity is able to accommodate the new ideas that are coming into our lives.
Absolutely, and fluidity is always on our mind. One of my favorite quotes is from Alvin Toffler's Future Shock, and he says, the illiterate of the 21st century won't be those who can't read or write, it'll be those who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn. So we wanted to create these spaces for unlearning and relearning as things change and grow. So I want to go from the practical and the physical to a little bit more philosophical. This was something that throughout the process, my staff and I have learned so much about functional design and architectural terms, and all the tours I've given have really opened my mind up to all of the thought you put into this building. But we were also, of course, seeking ways to better connect the people in our community to the knowledge and resources they need, and to each other. That was really important to us. As a whole, as a board and as a staff, we read Eric Kleinenberg's Palaces for the People, amazing book, you should all check it out, where he discusses social infrastructure, or basically the power of physical spaces to create and build social capital, and what that means. And one of the quotes from his book struck us and really shaped how we thought about this project. Kleinenberg said, the Greeks had their agora, the Romans their forum, the Middle Ages their cathedral and town square, the Renaissance, their palaces and enclaves for the privileged, and the 19th century, their centers of commerce, transportation, and government. But the campus is uniquely our generation's contribution to communal placemaking and place marking. So can you share with us, get a little into the philosophy of your ideas on social infrastructure and how that shaped this project?
Okay, we're going in deep.
Going deep.
We've done the introductions. No, I think you have just outlined exactly the nuances that people don't realize, which are to do with the way in which architecture is continually being remade, retooled for each generation and each society. So we make cities, and then they're living systems. And they're living systems in the sense that they are laboratories. Sometimes things work, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes things align with the way in which our societies work, and sometimes they don't. And so, in a way, what's become very clear as we have moved, in the 20th to the 21st century, from populations of, I think up to the 20th century, the world was only 1 billion people. We are now close to 8 billion. If we're a species that have kind of evolved for 150,000 years to 1 billion, and we've done this extraordinary acceleration in 100 years to 8 billion, you can understand the magnitude of change that's now happening all around us. We are having to remake and retool and rethink the idea of the city, and gathering is critical to the human experience. That's what we now completely understand in social sciences, in the philosophical world. And so how do you gather, and how do communities gather? Because gathering is about the dissemination of the most amount of information and the way in which we can communicate, not just with words or screens, but actually the information that is actually absorbed through the gathering of people. Because in a way, we are all archives of our histories and our places, and we share and connect with each other by gathering, not just by sort of reading books, but by talking, by communicating. We learn, and our brains learn from each other. And in this kind of extraordinary time, this is very important. So for me, the idea of the campus is a really important model, that because it creates a sense of a community, and it creates a place of safety. When there's a campus, there's a sense that we have created a gathering space. And I think intuitively, as people, we understand this. It's deep in our DNA. And we can then know that this space is a space that's been sort of framed, in nature, but separated from nature, but in nature, to allow us to go into ourselves and to be with each other. So, if we want to get into it, I think that it's one of the most powerful sort of typologies that exactly the 21st century is going to emerge, this idea of collections of spaces and the additive way in which different uses overlap and come very close to each other. And it's sort of technically to say to imbricate program together, to bring together very closely, almost sort of rubbing with each other, different programs that overlap and form, so that we can actually allow for a greater amount of absorption and learning in each of the conditions.
Absolutely. And what you'll see as you tour through this space is there are spaces within spaces within spaces, right? This is the Russian nesting doll of libraries. So we have spaces that are very small for studying, small intimate spaces, and then they just grow from there. And all of these spaces are very deliberate in their adjacencies. And that's just within the walls of the building. So I think what's really exciting about this space is the expansion out into the campus, and the fact that our location is also adjacent to Castle Playground, the ball fields, the lake, the pathways. We check out bicycles at the library, so you can get on a bicycle and now you can ride around the path in the park. It's a little easier than riding on the cobbles in Park Avenue.
Exactly.
Yes.
That's a message. Yes, we have those in
It's a great
Philadelphia.
space, and I think that was really important to us too, is that now you have these moments of serendipity, everything being so open, sparking these new connections. And we were really fortunate with your team to work with the Aspen Institute as well.
Yeah.
So we were one of 4 libraries selected in the United States to work with the Aspen Institute and their dialogue on public libraries early on in this journey. And we convened a large summit of the community, slices of community members, to come in and talk about what a library of the future looked like. And they talked really heavily about people, place, and platform. And can you speak a little bit to that and how that influenced the design of the space?
No, it's critical. People, place, and platform is about, placemaking and nodes. When we were sort of looking at this project, I was very excited about the fact that it was on the edge of the park, that it is in the center, more or less, of the city, and it is also at this kind of junction, this partie of the business district, the commercial, the sort of respite. This sort of location was really profound, and sometimes people think, oh no, the park shouldn't have infrastructure, but public infrastructure, relational, that kind of gives a kind of the most to the citizens, has a place in the park setting, because in a way the park is understood psychologically as the landscape for the people. So to have it at this edge and this corner, I think is really, really powerful, and it activates a certain kind of code inside people's minds about exactly how this sort of makes sort of, as it were, a platform or a belvedere as I create. I basically turn the platform into a belvedere.
Randy's still not convinced that's a real word.
I know. It sounds all fancy and whatever, but romantically, the belvedere is the place to have the overview, and usually the overview is a very beautiful place. So in a way, for me, the idea of creating the belvedere as the platform for the community. Come here, you see the different parts of the city, you also see the different things that are on offer to you here, and that you can actually do many things here, including celebrating important rituals and milestones of your life, is just then turns this into a real community asset in every way. You might not come for a book, but you'll come for an event. You might just need some time just to have space. And if you look at the way the belvedere works, it also folds into nature. One of the things we were really keen on is that it didn't feel like it was elevated. We wanted to push down the platform to touch the water, as it were. So the outdoor auditorium for me is one of my favorite moments. That we're able to kind of bring you right to the water in sort of on the platform, and that is a place to learn and to have events and to do other things. So in a way, yes, there's the interior of the building, but what I'm hoping people can take away from it is that the entire area around it, and then the way in which it ripples out into the landscape, is this idea of continually using the sort of infrastructure and what it offers as a place of inspiration.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the outdoor amphitheater, which is connected to our Unity Bridge, part of Martin Luther King Jr. Park. So I know there was a lot of sensitivity about honoring that legacy, and you have a great phrase, I think, that ties into it when you talk about the democratization of knowledge. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Well, one of my pet things is this idea of the democratization of knowledge, and I think the internet's been really amazing for that, but it's through a device. It's through technology, and it requires access, and it's getting cheaper and cheaper, and that's all good. But the democratization of knowledge is really about society always making a huge effort to allow, I think one of the greatest ways in which empowerment happens in our world is through learning. Learning is the critical path to sort of enlightenment of the self, about the world, and about all the issues that we're all grappling with. So this idea of democratizing as a kind of basic requirement, I think just emboldens and enables citizens to really live the most fulfilled lives. Because it allows you to not feel as though you are disconnected, but that you have the ability to join in and the ability to dive into the things that are about our civilization as human beings. And I think that that's really, really critical at that level, at that sort of meta level. So this idea of having access for those who have the ability to have access to many things, but also those who don't, to also have access to amazing computers, amazing infrastructure, a wealth of books, incredible teachers, people that are inspiring, to have that equality in society that is about access to learning and knowledge is, I think, a critical, it's a critical sort of hinge about the sort of, I think, the sophistication and the kind of, to not be, the quality of your civilization is in the quality of how much you give to your citizens in terms of empowering them to become full citizens. For me, that's how I really believe that. So, and I think that that's why this infrastructure is so important. That's why sharing knowledge and opening knowledge to people is so important. And that's how we get the best out of human ingenuity, because without access to that, inventions don't happen, sort of new ways of thinking don't happen, all the sparks that catapult us don't happen.
Yeah, creating these wonderful spaces. I think that reminds me of a Carl Sagan quote where he says something like, if you want to see what a community is like, see how they treat their libraries.
Yeah, it's fun. And it says a lot. It really, really says a lot. And I think also to retool is that, the word library, when we were doing the idea store, the word library has such weight because it's an old topology, and thank God it's changing. But, I want, in my mind, I want the library to be a place that, if you've never been, feels like an exciting place to go. It's as exciting as going to see a movie, in the sense that it's an unfolding of time, but it's a different kind of unfolding of time. It's not about static sort of absorption of information. It's about a dynamic dialectic with things, you know, and it's, you know, you spend 2 hours here, you're nourished and you've learned something, even if you're not reading a book, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that really comes to how we, can you hear me?
Sorry, we keep moving it down.
I hear it.
It's,
Sorry. Yeah, we're really into this conversation. I apologize. So when we built these spaces in the new library, that speaks to, I think, how libraries are changing as well, because while we did increase our overall collection size for the building, we've noticed in the library that our collection, our circulation, it does stay fairly steady in terms of how people are using us, but where we have seen tremendous growth, just exponential growth, is in the classes and activities. So we were going from 10,000 to 15,000 to 20,000. Before the pandemic, 38,000 people a year attending classes and events in the library.
Wow.
That's where we're seeing our growth. People are just hungry for these learning experiences, and you know, having these spaces now to do that in, I think, is a real game changer for the community.
yeah, there's only so much you can do on YouTube. Especially at home, so
Yeah.
there's nothing like having a teacher to learn about, you know, things one-to-one.
These wonderful spaces.
Yeah.
And so, pulling back out of the philosophical, I would love to talk about the building a little bit more and your how you took the climate into consideration. So folks have had a chance to go out on the Belvedere. You've seen the lush palm trees out there, and you may have noticed the similarities between the trees and the shapes of the buildings. So the buildings themselves do a lot of things. I think one of my favorite features is when it rains, there's actually a pathway that's revealed to you between the buildings where you can walk dry all the way between the spaces. It might not look like it, but it's this magical moment that happens. So can you talk a little bit about the exteriors, your inspiration, the flora, the fauna that came into this?
No, you know, I think a lot of people didn't believe us when we were working on this, but we wanted to make what I'm calling single forms that actually do a lot of work, like landscape, like trees and the palm trees and the flora and fauna. The geometry does all its work. The geometry does all its work, sorry. And for me, this idea of searching for an architecture that has a sort of innate efficiency, what I call, I mean, I'm sorry, using a sort of very industrial term, but a sort of an efficiency of form that does the most, rather than, so it's not just derived to be spectacular. That's not its genesis. It's derived to really deal with protecting the glass from glare and heat. Is derived to deal with, you know, making shade happen. The building's proximities create sort of wind pathways that are cooler. It sort of is derived to create, you know, a space that brings the temperature down naturally, natural air conditioning, by using the mass of the buildings to shield against solar gain. So there's a lot in there, and this idea of a sort of almost a, you know, you can imagine if you draw this building down to the bottom, it's almost like a pyramid, right? And it's almost like a tree, that there's a root and then it branches up. And you know, what you're looking at is a section that's almost like being in that treetop of the flora and fauna. And you know, the little sort of tricks that we're playing is with this sort of scallops, we're trying to talk about this idea of a kind of foliage, a lushness that is kind of at the top of the building. So, you know, there's a lot of inspiration from nature, and very much, you know, Florida has this extraordinary nature that I think is so precious that you should all, I mean, I know you all know and love it. I'm the one coming in and thinking, wow. But it's really very magical, and it teaches you a lot, and it tells you how to be in this part of the world. And I think in terms of architecture, for me, that's always the biggest inspiration to really, I love working in different parts of the world and different parts of the country because you learn something. And so for me, you know, what I have with my architectural education is one thing, but my inspiration is always to find a new place in which to kind of rethink and relearn, and to use that to kind of grow an idea. And that for me is how, there are certain sort of themes in my work, but it's constantly very different in every project I do, and I'm not interested in repeating the physical things that I do, but I'm interested in repeating the lessons. So if I learn something, that lesson becomes part of going into the next project as a fundamental, not as a style.
Absolutely. And so we've heard about all the successes in the building, and I'm curious, what were your, since the human brain loves conflict, right? What were your challenges in working with this design or this space?
You know, there's always challenges in what we do because we're always questioning everything. We're obsessively questioning. It's something my team and I do, and my team leaders who have to then be at the front of this usually get into very heated arguments all the time with different folk, but it's actually part of it. The training is that it's, we talk about this, it's part of it. It's hell when you're in it, but the dialogue and the questioning is part of how you create new things. I know that, through the sort of 30 years of now working in architecture. And so there are lots of kind of moments, and the sort of way in which the different experiences within the team teaches the junior kids to understand what's going on. The senior team understand, the senior team talk to me. I talk to people that I, kind of elder architects that I know and love who support me when things happen. So it's a kind of multi-generational kind of way of understanding how to learn about making innovation and how to learn about making new things in the world and the confidence to do that. So yes, there are many moments of tension, but for me now, I just don't dwell on that. I dwell on what that releases for us to get to what we need to get to. And it's tough, and it's really tough. Trust me, my teams are, it's like trenches, but it is what it is. It's just part of the way in which human, and I think it's good because really, people need to question you. It's not just about accepting ideas, because I think if ideas are just thrown out and they're just accepted, also, they're not really, as it were, baptized through the fire. They're not tested, they're not checked. So, as long as the questioner is also open to the answers and to kind of negotiate between that, then you have this beautiful equation which really makes something new. So, everything from wanting to not have, to wanting to have certain colors that are really for me to do with the light here, to kind of have certain tonalities that are to do with certain, it's all nature inspired.
Right, I believe you looked at postcards, the Tiffany glasses, but palms, succulents, plants, the beautiful flowers that are here, and wanting to kind of use that as ways to kind of really express. So always in the architecture, there's a kind of grounding material that's very solid, and then they're kind of like this very vibrant, high frequency, sort of luminous things above, and that's really, again, looking at nature, looking at how it's doing what it's doing. Absolutely. Well, your team was tremendous to collaborate with, and everything you said about the importance of the democratization of knowledge. I mean, that speaks to the core of a library's mission, is that we serve infant to infinity, all swaths of life. That it's really important that we're meeting the needs of everyone in our community, and everyone's welcome. And creating these spaces, I think we did that. We have this new library commons, which is our community living room. You'll notice as you go through the building that we have now dedicated our second floor to our youth services. So you're creating that space that they can own, that they can have as their own, that they can feel free to play and engage in, while the grown-ups get downstairs and you only hear a little shrieking from the upstairs. But is there anything you'd like to end on and talk about that we haven't touched on yet for the project?
No, I think it's, I just think, by the way, you have an extraordinary asset. This is an extraordinary asset. So please use her.
Taking a vacation.
You're lucky to have that. I think it's amazing to, congratulations to all of you, because you've allowed this to happen. It's your taxpayer dollars and also the great patrons who've given their money to support this. So, well done. I think we all, to use phrases that were said, we all take a bow today, because I think we feel like we've all done something. And it's really the entire community, and I'm just grateful to be a part of it, and thank you to you, citizens of Winter Park, for allowing us, Adjaye Associates, to be part of your family, because we're now, whether you like it or not, part of your family. And we look forward to other journeys together.
We have a long plan for this building, that's for sure. Thank you, David. Thank you so much.